Racial discrimination in housing is an old problem with deep roots in social attitudes and government policy. In recent years, the problem has been exacerbated by growth in market demand and gentrification. According to new research by a testing program at Suffolk University Law School, Analysis Group, and the Boston Foundation, much of the problem lies with real estate brokers and rental property owners. To tell us about the findings is the Senior Advisor on Civil Rights and Fair Housing at Metro Housing Boston, Barbara Chandler. Thank you very much for being with us, Barbara.
Thank you for having me.
Barbara, even before the testing started for this research, there were some things that people knew about discrimination in the greater Boston housing market. What was the picture of that?
Well, when you work in the area of fair housing or just civil rights at large, you are very much aware of geographic segregation patterns. So for instance, the greater Boston area is the seventh most racially segregated area in this country. So that just shows that it should be no surprise to no one. It was certainly no surprise to me to see the results of the study that says that there is a pattern of racial discrimination in housing. So while we had some great laws, the Fair Housing Act being passed in 1968, and our state laws, anti-discrimination laws, Mass Chapter 151B, while they've been good responses to when discrimination has happened, we haven't had a lot that's been in practice to either break up the segregation patterns or to prevent them from happening or reoccurring.
Well, if you go back 40 or 50 years ago, if you were victimized by discrimination, the alternative was to find a place, let's say Roxbury or Dorchester. It would be at least affordable, but how's it different today?
It's really not. I mean, there is concentration of affordable housing in urban neighborhoods,
but maybe not as much as there used to be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Not as much as it used to be, but it's still pretty much located in the same areas. So when you look at the amount of affordable housing in the city of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, and you compare it to what's going on in the suburbs, you're seeing that pattern continue. Discrimination in housing does not happen in isolation. We have decades and decades, some people would say centuries, of economic discrimination against people who are Black, people who are brown, people who are Asian. So when you have the economic discrimination that forces people into the need for affordable housing, and affordable housing is only concentrated in urban neighborhoods, and as you'll see in Boston, majority of it concentrated in just a handful of neighborhoods, then you see this racial geographic segregation pattern continuing. In fact, some people say nationwide that we are more segregated today than we were in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was first passed by Congress.
Well, in the testing, you had Black and white people who presented themselves as looking for apartments, presumably with comparable ability to pay. What was the response like if you break that down by race?
Well, Suffolk did a very interesting test because they compared what happened to people who had vouchers as well as people who didn't. So when you looked at it from the perspective of testers who did not have vouchers, you saw a significant increase in discriminatory actions against people who were not white. When you add the issue of the voucher, now in Massachusetts, discriminating against people who have vouchers is actually illegal. So when you introduce the voucher into the mix, you actually saw that both groups got discriminated against pretty closely to each other. So when you're thinking about the whole implications of race, when you talk about a person of color who also has a voucher, then they have dual barriers against them, which makes it so much more significantly harder to find things. So I think Suffolk did an excellent job of being able to illustrate that there's this interconnection between a lot of societal dynamics that are causing this racial segregation pattern to continue.
Well, what I noticed about the racial gap in the response to the testing was that Black apartment seekers, they didn't really get some things that were explicitly negative from brokers or the owners. It was just that they didn't get as many responses, or they didn't hear some of the positive things that white applicants might have heard.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in this for a very long time, this field, and I've seen the discrimination played out different ways. So when I first started, it was very blatant. Someone would just say, I don't rent to people who are Black. Now you see the subtle things that came out of the Suffolk report. And this is things that the clients at Metro Housing Boston frequently report to my staff and I. The issue of ghosting, for instance, where a housing provider agrees to interview someone and show them the unit, and when our client shows up, housing provider is not there, phone calls not getting returned. And as you brought out, white testers being shown better units or more units, getting quicker responses. We've lately have seen that there are special rental deals that are being offered to people who are white, and it's not being offered to people who are Black. So it makes it sometimes harder to get at what the discrimination actually is, but it's also very apparent when you see a study like what Suffolk did, what's happening out there. So we do need to change our advocacy approaches. We need to change our policy approaches. We need to increase opportunities to do investigation and enforcement of our fair housing laws, because the minute you kind of clamp down on one form of prejudicial action, there's a new form that takes. And the more subtle it is, the harder to get at. But it is not impossible to get at it. So fair housing projects like what we have at Metro Housing Boston, that's what we do. And so we work closely with our partners in the civil rights world, like the Suffolk folks, and we get at what's going on. We go beyond the surface so that we can get the full protections of the law for our clients by being as attentive to all those subtleties that get connected to this problem.
Well, one reason you need more testing is because discrimination is hard to pin down, even if it is easy to suspect. But if you're an apartment seeker and you have very limited time to resolve your problem, what else can you do to protect yourself from discrimination?
Well, one of the things that the laws do is they do give extended time periods after the last discriminatory interaction to file a complaint. So when you have a voucher and the clock is ticking, you can actually concentrate on finding that unit and then afterwards be able to file a complaint. Having projects like the Suffolk project, which does more than just testing, they actually provide advocacy. So does the Lawyers for Civil Rights. And Metro Housing does. So reaching out to these kind of advocates when this thing happens is important, because then there's a quick response. So like when we get a call from a client, we are calling the property owner usually within a day. And we are trying to get at, why is this person springed out? What is the real reason? And you confront what you're being told. And the more you confront it, the more likely that you're going to be able to disclose that there was a prejudicial action, and to see if you can reverse the action so that the person can at least have a fair chance at getting a unit. And one thing I want to point out that people sometimes forget, fair housing is not just about getting the unit, it's about keeping the unit as well. So all these advocacy groups, as well as Metro Housing Boston, we do spend a lot of time dealing with cases where someone's trying to be forced out of a unit. It could be that another tenant is harassing a tenant due to race, disability, sexual orientation, whatever. So we try to get involved in those cases as well to see if we can stop it so the person's not forced out of the house, particularly if they're forced out because they fear that they're in a dangerous position because of the tenant-on-tenant harassment.
You know, one of the numbers that really struck me from the research was how many calls from people with vouchers were not returned. What would that be like? You know, if I were one of those would-be renters and I were looking for a place, I mean, wouldn't I have to be looking for a long time maybe before I found something?
Yeah, I mean, we have to tell our clients, you have to keep calling and calling and calling, that you have to spread a really wide net so that something will work out. And, you know, the thing about vouchers is the clock is ticking. So housing authorities do have a certain amount of flexibility in giving extensions, but the extensions don't oftentimes go far enough when you are in a hot real estate market such as Boston. And when you combine that with racial prejudice, it makes it even harder. So we really do need to look at some of the policy implications that have come out of this study, such as how much time is available for people to find housing. And we also, in looking at that issue, there are not enough vouchers to go around. So there are very extensive wait lists. So this whole issue of how much time you can give somebody an extension, you also, as a voucher administrator, have to take in consideration that you have thousands of people on your wait list. So it's not an easy one, but I think it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah. Finally, Barbara, if people do want to get some help with housing and they have some questions, is there some way they can follow up with Metro Housing Boston?
Yes, they can call me directly. All my contact information is on our website. I can give you my telephone number right now if you want it, which
Please
is
do.
617-425-6681. You know, you can email me as well, which is barbara.chandler@metrohousingboston.org. And I know I'm rattling off a lot of numbers right now, but if you go on our agency website, my contact information is there, and we'll respond to whatever questions people have for us.